we're joined by David Woodson. David is our Executive Director of Campus Energy Operations and Utilities, and he's been with us for almost exactly a year and a half. He's an alum of the UW. He spent most of his career up at the University of British Columbia helping decarbonize their energy infrastructure. So now he has this major task of helping us with the same work. So David, I'll hand it over to you. Actually, one more comment. Feel free to put your questions in the chat. We'll have a Q&A period at the end of David's presentation. Take it away, David.
Awesome. Thanks, Marilyn. And specifically hired here at the UW to lead the charge of decarbonizing the steam plant. And we'll explain why that's so significant for our campus. And also the other sort of charge for me is the reinvestment into our energy infrastructure on our campus. UW's efforts to decarbonize involve lowering the temperature of our district energy system to enable energy sharing and energy reuse. The plan, in essence, is a fuel switch replacing natural gas-fired boilers at our central power plant with electrically powered high-temperature district-scale heat pumps. There you go. That's the whole plan. No, hour for questions. No. Look, there's more to this, but in essence, that is what we're talking about. All right. So, agenda of the day, kind of an overview, get everyone on the same page of our what we do at UW with our centralized district heating system and cooling system. A little bit of the history of the power plant, which is, the significance of that is that there's been lots of major transformations in the district system at UW over the last 100+ years. And this is really just the next major transformation that we need to do. I'll go into sort of the 4 key challenges. Obviously, reducing greenhouse gas emissions is at the top of that list, but there's a couple of others that we need to address at the same time. Go through the 5-part energy transformation strategy that we've developed, and then end with next steps, and then opportunity for questions from everybody. Okay, all right, let's get into this. Right, so hey, just a little step back, right? So, we burn natural gas at our steam plant to produce steam, and then that steam is distributed through a tunnel system, about 8 miles of tunnels out to our buildings on the campus. So 19 million square feet of building space, and over 14 million of that is connected to the steam system, and those buildings are heated from the steam system. Now, it's a wonderful way to transfer heat through the steam system, but this represents 93% or 92% of our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions on our campus, which means if we're going to make a dramatic reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions, we have to look at and transform the way in which we heat our buildings on the campus. So that's a focal point for it. Also highlight that cooling, which is typically treated separately, also done through our central plant. We cool less, only about 8 million square feet of space on the campus through the central plant out of the 19 million. So that's like, what, 41% or so. So there's quite a number of buildings that don't have cooling at all or have a standalone cooling system within it. And as we go into this, I'll explain why that's significant. And I'll just give a little starting point on that. Cooling to a certain degree is just another form of heating. Think of how your fridge works at home, right? You have the box of the fridge, it stays cool by pulling the heat out of the box, and then you have a radiator on the back that basically gets rid of that waste heat into your kitchen. And at the university, we effectively do the same thing, but on a way bigger scale. At the power plant, we have chillers that produce cold water. We send that cold water out to the buildings, and we extract the heat from the buildings, cool them, and then bring that warm water back to the power plant. And the same way the radiator gets rid of it to your kitchen, we use cooling towers to get rid of that waste heat to the air, to the atmosphere. And therein lies kind of a theme of opportunity of, well, wait a second, why can't we reuse that heat instead of just getting rid of it? And the fundamental problem is that the steam system is just too hot and doesn't allow for that reclaim of that, what we call low-grade heat. And there's lots of other sources of low-grade heat, but that's a really good starting point. And that's what we want to get after, is lower the temperature of our steam system and take advantage of the sources of low-grade heat that are around us. All right, so challenges. Number one, I've already spoken about greenhouse gas emissions and the significance of the plant. Just throw a couple other numbers. In the state's Climate Commitment Act that's now in place, any entity that consumes more than 25,000 tons is considered a covered entity. And so we're up at 86,000, so we are well into it. Yeah, we need to make dramatic reductions if we no longer want to be a covered entity under the Climate Commitment Act. The second challenge speaks to energy efficiency of our buildings. When you look at as a campus as a whole, what our overall energy use is in comparison to what the standard campus that's been set in the Clean Building Performance Standard by the state, we're almost double what that target is. So significant opportunity to reduce the amount of energy that we consume on our campus. I'll explain some of the examples of that as well. Third is electrical capacity constraint. So this is interesting. So I mentioned that in essence, our switch is to go from natural gas fired boilers to electrically fired district scale heat pumps. And so that's an incremental use of electricity. And at the same time, as we decarbonize and electrify through decarbonization, so are others in the region around Seattle and in the state. And so that puts pressure on the electric utilities to provide clean electricity towards us. It's great. Seattle City Light, 100% electrical or clean electricity. That's fantastic. But we got to be careful of where the incremental electricity and what its profile looks like. And I'll also throw on that there's two other challenges happening at the same time. We live in the Pacific Northwest, typically benefited from mild marine air. 70 degrees was a hot day in the summer. That's just not the world we live in anymore. I think last year we set a record for the number of days over 80 degrees in September and October. And 2 years ago, of course, we had the heat dome effect in June. A 1 in 2,000 year event, sure, but how frequently are we now going to see those events? The point what I'm getting to is buildings that didn't need cooling before need cooling now. And if they don't need it yet, they're going to need it 2030, 2040, 2050. Where does that cooling come from? Well, typically, when we're cooling buildings, it's through the consumption of electricity in a process of mechanical cooling. And so that's another big pressure that not just the University of Washington, but once again, everybody in the region that now is needed to provide cooling, whereas before they could have just used the 70-degree outdoor air to cool spaces inside buildings. The third part, of course, is electric vehicles, which we all see that transformation taking place. What's interesting for UW, it's slightly different, right? Everyone's parking here during the day, during the peak time of electrical use, as opposed to when you go home and you charge at night, and that's at the low end of electrical use. So anyway, point being is 3 challenges all at the same time: decarbonization, electrification, secondly, climate adaptation of more cooling, and EVs. All taking place same time, putting significant pressure on the electrical grid. And at UW, we got constraints of being at capacity with our connections to Seattle City Light. All right, the fourth is, if anyone's toured our steam plant and seen the age of the infrastructure that's inside there. I mean, I think we still have one of our oldest boilers is from 1946. So look, we have to spend a considerable amount of money anyway, renewing this infrastructure. So why not renew it in a way that actually addresses the first three challenges on this list? So the good news is, I'll jump a little bit ahead. A little background piece of the history of the plant. I talked about like transformations of the past, right? First power plant, it's 1894. This is a picture of it. There's the lake. And you're wondering, well, wait a second, why is the lake so high? It's because way back in 1894, the lake was much higher and they drained it. That's a whole other story. 1901, they moved the plant, to the far reaches of the edges of the campus that, never would get in the way of any things. Of course, that's right where the Allen Library is today. By 1908, they moved it, and that's where the present location of the plant is. So, and then along the way, up until I think 1988, we burned coal to make the steam, and then in 1988 was the big transformation from coal to natural gas. And and here we are in 2023, and it's the next transformation from steam to hot water and electrification. All right, present day. All right, and so time for transformation. Once again, reinforcing the four challenges and highlighting, hey, the good news is technology exists that allows us to make this transformation that we need to do today. So here's the start of our 5-point strategy. The first part is focusing on energy efficiency. Of course, the cheapest, best, safest energy to not use is the energy you don't need to use. So there's a couple layers of this in terms of our focus. Number one is expanding metering within our buildings. There was a fantastic smart metering project that the UW embarked on 9 years ago. And really, this is just leveraging off that work and finishing up so that we have great access to good data on how energy is being consumed on the campus. The second is to upgrade our control system. So we still have a number of buildings that are on pneumatic controls, as well as we have buildings just with sort of what we call dated control systems. We want to update those to modern digital control systems, really so that we can access that energy data in this third piece, which is taking advantage of modern day data analytics software that's out there. There's quite a few different vendors in this space, and this can be very transformational. My time at UBC, the program there, we connected over 1 million points to the system and saw massive benefits on many fronts, not to the least of it also the researchers on the campus were very keen on having access to that campus energy model data as well. Anyway, lots of pieces there. The fourth is this idea of a green revolving fund, which really is just a fancy way of saying, hey, let's invest money in energy savings projects that would reduce our energy consumption, and then take the savings from the earlier year investments and use that to pay for future year projects. And if you focus, and this is what we've been doing, on quick payback projects, so projects that have an average payback of a year or around a year, that you can get this thing to be self-sustaining quite quickly. This work is underway in terms of investments into energy conservation projects, and we are quite feeling really good about how quickly we'll get this to be self-sustaining. It may be as soon as August or September of this year, 2023. All right, next part of the strategy. This is kind of a foundational one, and this is the converting the steam system to hot water. I mentioned earlier, hey, steam is a very efficient way of transferring energy. It also means when you have steam leaks, it's a very effective way of losing energy, but fundamentally it's just too hot, and it doesn't allow us to take advantage of the new heat pump technology that exists. And the significance of being able to use that heat pump technology is that it enables us to take advantage of that low-grade waste heat and the various sources of low-grade waste heat. We can't do that with a steam system. That's why we need to that switch to hot water, and that's why that switch to hot water is really transformational in this whole effort. Right, so and when we talk about sort of reuse or repurposing energy, think of like there's lots of different locations on campus, but a data center, for example, is a good example of to keep all the computers cool. You're extracting heat from that data center, and there's an opportunity of, can we reuse that heat instead of sending it to a cooling tower and dumping it away to the atmosphere? And that's just one example, but there's other opportunities on the campus to look for where waste heat is not being taken advantage of because we can't, because we don't have a hot water system. We only have a steam system. All right. And this is at UBC, that was the big project that we had done, was converting the campus from steam to hot water. All right. Third part is centralized cooling. You might have caught earlier that I mentioned we only have 8 million of the 19 million square feet connected to the cooling system. And so we're only bringing back the waste heat for that 8 million square feet of space. The other 11 million square feet of space either doesn't have cooling and needs it, or it has its own chillers and its own cooling towers, and it's dumping that heat at the building level. So there's a play for, as we address deferred maintenance in the buildings, as those chillers in the buildings reach the end of their life, we, instead of replacing them, we connect those buildings back to the central plant. And the other really kind of key part here is that those central plant chillers consume less electricity to produce the same or more cooling as the buildings do. And so given our electrical constraint, this is a really, really smart play of making the best use of the electricity we have by putting all of the cooling in the central plants. And oh, by the way, the other benefit is all of that waste heat then also goes back to the central plant. So one of the themes in the energy strategy is to centralize the cooling, maximize the amount of capacity that we have in our 2 central plant buildings that we operate. All right, fourth part, electrify heating. Now, I've spoken to this using the low-grade heat from the cooling system. Of course, there's a little bit of challenge there in that the timing of using that waste heat is incongruent with seasons, right? You think of summertime, that's when your most cooling is happening, and therefore your most amount of waste heat will exist. Well, that's actually the time of year where we have the least amount of heating requirements. We do have some, right? We've got domestic hot water in buildings and showers. It still needs to happen. So don't get me wrong. It's not like we wouldn't use that low-grade waste heat. We would. We just won't need all of the heat in that season. Conversely, in the wintertime, when we need the most amount of heat, that's when the least amount of cooling is taking place. There still is some cooling for things like data centers, et cetera, but not enough to generate enough heat that we would need for the campus. So we need to do other things. And we can take advantage of that same heat pump technology. And the next item on our list of things that we look at is low-grade heat from the regional sewer lines. So being that we're in the city, we have significant an advantage in that the King County sewer lines literally couldn't be any closer to our 2 plants. They literally run in the street adjacent to both of the plants. And the nice thing about and the sewer lines, we're really talking about like that waste hot water. So think of everyone having showers in the morning and all that warm water going down the drain. That's the heat that's in that water is what we want to, in essence, reuse on our campus. And the nice thing about being in the city and those regional sewer lines is you have consistent flows 12 months out of the year that you wouldn't otherwise get in another location. So that's item number 2. And so the electrified heating is just referring to this, as I mentioned earlier, this fuel switch from natural gas to electricity. All right, other pieces in electrified heating also include a fascinating opportunity. I'm jumping ahead as it relates to what am I doing here? sorry, a little technical difficulty. A great opportunity that's available to us from Lake Washington. By accessing deep lake water, we can optimize the performance of our heat pumps because the water temperature there is consistent year round. It's like a 2 degree Fahrenheit differential, and we can use the lake as a resource for cooling and heating. And it provides additional benefits like increasing our cooling capacity without significantly increasing our electrical demand. Like there'll be electrical consumption related to running pumps to extract the water from the lake. But in essence, we don't have to provide cooling through a mechanical cooling process that's consuming electricity. We're just using that cold water in the summertime for that. Further, the project has a potential environmental betterment in that returning cold water to the ship canal in the winter, spring, and in the summer could improve conditions by lowering the temperature of the canal for migrating salmon. Right now, summer temperatures in the ship canal reach levels that are lethal for salmon, and it creates a barrier and prevents their return. And I don't know if people saw the article in the Seattle Times last summer. The agencies involved in trying to assist the salmon literally are scooping them up at the Ballard Locks and putting them on trucks and driving them to their destination. That is how critical that situation has got. So it's not to say that we can solve that, but we can potentially improve it by lowering the temperature of the ship canal and creating a betterment for migrating salmon. All right, the last piece related to electrified heating is also just this aspect of thermal storage, both heating storage and cooling storage. And I'll speak to cooling storage, for example, what the advantages of that can be. Right now, our electrical consumption peak happens in the summer on the hottest days. And so if we had the ability to, in a sense, produce cold water in the middle of the night when we're not at our electrical peak, and then use that cold water during the day, during the peak time periods, that would allow us to make some room from our electrical demand, in essence, peak shave our electrical demand through the use of cooling storage. So, without adding, large transmission lines or capacity to the campus, we could increase our electrical demand capacity just through adding this technology or adding this infrastructure to our campus. All right, the first 4 pieces get us 80% there. And then what we're highlighting is that last final push, the last 20% that we don't actually decide today, but yet we continue to scan the marketplace for technology developments. Will nuclear fusion come through? And then what else potentially could be there? And this allows us to continue to provide steam. Look, I've talked about steam as being solely for heating, and that's not true. We also use heating in the hospital for sterilization. We use it for process loads on the campus. And so the idea here is when we continue to provide that steam for those purposes, and we scan the marketplace over the next decade or less for new technologies that would get us all the way to 100%. All right, that's the 5-part strategy. And then this kind of graphically is highlighting what's the time frame. Now this shows it to 2035, and a couple of themes I'd highlight, like converting to hot water is mentioned. That's kind of foundational piece. The energy efficiency play, that's already happening. And just visually, we just split this across. And we're not going to stop doing energy efficiency projects after 10 years. This continues, but once again, it's just easier graphically to show it this way. And this shows us 2035 or 2033, 2034, no longer being a covered entity within the state. Believe me, we're doing everything we can to try to accelerate this chart such that this end line down here, the 25K, is more like 2030. And so that's a goal of ours to try to go faster than what this presently is mapped out at. And then overall, significant amount of cost, but I'd highlight that, every project that we are proposing to do will have some form of positive net present value related to it when you compare it against the status quo, right? So whether it's paying as part of the Climate Commitment Act through the auctions that as a covered entity we now need to do, or the money that we pay on an annual basis. I think we spend around $10 million or just over $10 million on natural gas a year for all the purposes that I've described. And we're going to need to spend hundreds of millions of dollars replacing boilers in the steam plant anyway. So if you take into account all of those sort of existing funds that we need to spend and then apply them against the components of these projects, believe that everything that we'd be looking at would have some form of a positive net present value related to it. All right. Next steps. Well, as I mentioned, we're already started on the energy efficiency efforts and accelerating those. And the second really, really big one, and I think those that know me that are on this call, they're like, okay, Dave, when's the RFP coming out? Fingers crossed this week, but this is a big one for us, is to retain a service partner to help implement our energy transformation strategy and provide that progressive design coordination for the project. And that is the presentation. So from here on out, Marilyn, I'll let you facilitate questions that have come up or questions that you may have.
Thank you, David. So yeah, the first question that came up was, what is the potential impact on the lake temperature over time after we're harnessing it?
Yeah, great question. And this becomes, in terms of accessing the lake water, one of the requirements is to, in essence, assess the lake as a thermal battery to exactly determine how much water can be extracted without having any thermal effect on the lake. Other universities, Cornell University had a deep lake project over 25 years ago. The city of Toronto and a private company, Enwave, also do deep lake cooling. And so we've talked to our colleagues at both places. We've learned a lot from them. And that is one of the key steps that they had to do through the permit process. Frankly, it's one of many. And absolutely, we don't want to just attempt to solve our cooling problem or our wintertime heating problem by taking cold water from the lake, but do so and create another environmental harm and making it happen. There's some 18 permits that we're going to need to acquire to be successful with the lake project, and all of which are well intended to ensure that what we do is exactly what we say, which would be a betterment to the lake and not actually make things worse.
Cool. Another question is, what's happening with adding solar panels on UW buildings?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of solar panels. You think of that, I made reference to the electrical peak being on the hottest summer days. So you got to believe we'd be able to generate a lot of electricity on those same summer days. But I think the big play for solar panels is not necessarily on the rooftops of the buildings, but the E18 parking lot on the east side of campus. I believe there's a pilot project that's being planned because the only concern with the parking lots is that it had to be built on pilings. So that's what the pilot project is trying to assess, is just how expensive that is to do. We're hopeful that it's not, but that would be the big play. That'd be like 5 to 10 megawatts of electricity. And just to give you a scale, right, our peak electrical demand is around 54 megawatts of electricity. So solar panel is not going to solve our full electrical demand requirements, but it can go a long way as definitely a helpful piece and part, so that we're not solely dependent on our electricity coming from one location.
Here's another good question. Is there any consideration or analysis done to get rid of the central system completely over time and use the distributed system where the needs may be adapted differently?
Interesting. Yeah, look, there's ultimately, like, one of the things that I'd highlight is the ability from a not just energy cost, but also from a maintenance cost and a support piece. Been lots of studies been done. One of the more recent ones I saw was Vanderbilt University did a comparison of a decentralized system versus a centralized system. In the end, everything landed in terms of the most cost-effective way to deliver energy was through that centralized system. I mentioned earlier on the cooling side, for example, we're consuming nearly double the amount of electricity with the decentralized chillers compared to the centralized chillers. So given that we have electricity as a constraint, it seems to me that our ability to, and the fact that we need to provide more cooling to the campus than we presently do today, the best, most effective way to do that is through the central plant. We have a different profile of buildings on the campus in our 170 buildings, and that allows us to take advantage of the fact that that sometimes certain buildings are going to be having excess heat. An example of excess heat would be a clinical space that has air changes per hour in it, and maybe it's got 8 air changes per hour. Maybe it's got more than that. Some of my colleagues tell me. But think about it. 8 air changes in an hour. All the air in the room is being pushed out of there in 7 minutes. There's an opportunity to reclaim either waste heat or cooling from that space. Anyway, the point being is we have a variety of buildings on our campus, and we can share energy across, and that's the advantage of that a centralized system would allow us to do. Now, look, there might be sort of sections of the campus that have other advantages. So, for example, pulling chilled water from the lake might make more sense to just keep that chilled water at the lower parts of the campus and have it serve perhaps the athletic buildings that don't have any cooling today, and also swing it around to the hospital and Magnuson Health Sciences Center area, and then free up the cooling demand that presently goes to the hospital and the Magnuson Health Science and use that more on upper campus, for example. Just an idea, but the point being is you can sort of, it doesn't all have to be centrally in one plant, but you might have sort of districts by which you share energy in a smart way based on the types of buildings that are there. The last piece I'll just say on this is that a whole bunch of the legislation in the city and the state of Washington previously has been written in a way in which it's building centric. And so the Clean Building Performance Standard, for example, that's law in the state of Washington, would cause us to have all of our buildings on our campus be compliant. We had forecasted that we'd have over 30 buildings that would be non-compliant and most likely would be non-compliant forever. And what that would trigger us to do is, I'll speed the story along, but put in air source heat pumps in those 30 buildings to match that decentralized approach. I would rather have 3 large district scale heat pumps in the central plant that served 170 buildings. And I have a better chance of actually maintaining those three heat pumps with the staff located in the central plant. I put all my technical eggs in one basket, for that matter, as opposed to distributing all of that technical equipment into various buildings. I could comply with the law by putting in 30 individual air source heat pumps. Oh, by the way, air source heat pumps aren't as efficient as the water source heat pumps. By efficient, I mean I'm going to have to consume more electricity to provide the same amount of heating and cooling for those spaces. Anyway, the short is it makes more financial sense to put our technical equipment in the central plant than it is to distribute. Yet there may be some regional opportunities in the campus to take advantage of elevation, for example.
and you've actually answered the next question with your answer to the previous question. There are a few comments in here about clarifying the situation with the solar panels. Jan says that E01 and E18 are 8 megawatt potential.
Okay. I gave a break. You said 5 to 10.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay. If there is such a concern about electricity use constraints coming from Seattle City Light, does the university have plans to build its own electricity generation infrastructure aside from the aforementioned solar?
Oh, there's no plans for cogen, although I would highlight that the university does have, we do generate on a back pressure steam generator in the power plant. It was an old piece of equipment that's being replaced through an existing resiliency project that's underway. And in it, there'll be a 3 megawatt generator, but once again, not 54 megawatts, but a 3 megawatt base load that is to be online this fall. Yeah, so no plans for sort of doing a larger version of that. And the main driver is that, you know, to run a cogen facility means we would be locking in burning natural gas, which is a fossil fuel, which is what we're trying to get away from. So, I mean, there are potential opportunities for, you know, use of hydrogen, use of renewable natural gas, but on the renewable natural gas front, that is a considerable volume in comparison to what is presently available. So it's not on our radar, but the aspect of very much trying to mitigate that all eggs in one basket with Seattle City Light, it is very much on our radar.
Now I'll go to one of my questions and I'll just go ahead and hit you with the really hard one. So the recent IPCC report says we need rapid, deep, and in most cases, immediate greenhouse gas emission reductions in all sectors this decade to keep below 1.5 degrees of warming. So can we speed this up even more and get this done by 2030?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's very much been sort of front and center as we're like pulling this together. And you know, having the experience of how long the hot water conversion took at UBC, you know, the first shovel in the ground, or the time that we had approval from our board, which was 2011, to completion of the project, which was 2017. You know, that was 6 years. Now UBC's campus is more spread out. And so to a certain degree, that might make us think that we could go faster because our campus is more condensed, and perhaps our tunnel system and our ability to repurpose the tunnel in locations would work to our advantage towards speeding things up. But we also have a lot more square footage on this campus to transform. And that's just steam to hot water, which, as I mentioned, is kind of the foundational project. Now, there's things we're doing in parallel already on the energy efficiency play, and the consolidating cooling is also something that can be done in parallel, and to a certain degree, it's already happening as decisions come up of, you know, a chiller fails, and you know, do we replace that chiller, or do we use that as an opportunity to connect to the central system? Along the way, you have to make sure we actually increase the central system for that strategy to work. So I'm giving a very long answer, really just trying to say, Marilyn, that we've not given up trying to get this thing done by 2030. We're doing everything we can to try to accelerate it, but also just trying to be realistic in the ordering and the timing of the projects.
Mm-hmm. So let's fast forward and let's say we've managed to do it. It's 2030.
Oh, sorry. Hold on. I also throw out like the permitting process on the lake. Like, I order magnitude guesstimate that's been given to me is a minimum 3 years. You know, but the issue affecting the salmon is happening already. And so, even that in itself, it's like, um, uh, we wait too long on this, and betterment to the salmon won't really matter, because that opportunity will have passed itself.
So maybe that's a good segue into, what can we as members of the UW community or members of departments across the university do to support you in speeding this up?
Yeah, well, we've set up a couple task force. We have a faculty task force, a student task force, staff task force. So people that have an interest in this, that would like to be more engaged and more involved. That's one outlet that's available, and we've used those forums not just as a, well, I mean, to start with, from a communication standpoint of getting everyone on the same page, like doing this presentation today. And then, but beyond that, on the faculty side, looking for opportunities for, campus as a living lab and how that might fit into different components of the project. I think, going back to your question of, well, how can people help? Look, I'm super excited to be here. I'm having a ton of fun taking all the stuff that I learned at UBC and being able to apply it again. But this is not going to be a successful project if it's a UW facilities project led by Dave Woodson with no engagement or support from the rest of the institution. It really needs to be a we as the University of Washington really have to get behind this. There's so many opportunities for engagement beyond. We're learning so much about the Inflation Reduction Act federally, and how it could be a considerable source of funds for this. Anywhere from potentially 40 to 70% of the funding could come from there. The Climate Commitment Act that was passed in the state of Washington, they had the first auction in February, collected some $300 million. There's 4 auctions a year. There's a considerable amount of potential funding opportunities to make this happen. And the greater engagement we can have of all the agencies within UW to focus our efforts to make sure that everyone knows our story, to acquire that funding, and to make this happen. And frankly, we're one of the largest district energy systems in the state. There are many others, over 30. And by demonstrating what can be done here at UW, solving this challenge really goes a long way towards leading by example and showing others what is possible. And really, when you back to your question on the IPC scene, that's the piece, right? Just solving UW's carbon emissions profile on its own scale perhaps is not that significant. But what is significant is when you think of our campus as a small city, and the fact that we have the district energy system and all the buildings, that we can demonstrate what's possible, and really lead the way for other systems, other cities, and that is where we can make a significant difference towards that 2030 deadline.
We have another question that came in. Yes, actually, yes. One, is the plan fully approved and supported by university leadership? What's the timeline and main obstacles to implementation?
Yeah, I think that the energy strategy is, but to, our next steps, as I mentioned on the thing, was to get an energy services provider and turn the strategy into a implementation plan with specific projects. And then those projects would feed into the university's capital planning process for approval. I think, all the way along, I've got tons of, we presented this to the Board of Regents in November. We've presented this to the Enterprise Risk Management Committee at the university. We've got nothing but really positive support for this effort. Obviously, if we're able to secure funding from sources that don't interfere with the present streams that the university receives, that's kind of, I think, really a fundamental piece and something that we're trying to do. But yeah, feel fully supported. But we need to make this pivot from a strategy to an implementation plan and get the funding behind these different components of the project. And also to highlight that, like, as we've talked about here in Maryland, 2030, we got to get this done, right? Like, this isn't something that we can kick down the can. It's not something you start in 2027. Like, honestly, we're a couple of years behind where we need to be, and we need to accelerate things to get things done by 2030.
Let's see, how is UW processing the newly passed legislation HB 1777 and the newly found ability to form private partnerships to meet their energy transformation needs?
Yeah, House Bill 1777, it's great. We were supportive of that. Look, effectively, that helps other agencies even more so than us. We had other ways in which we could have done the same thing already. This just simplifies things. I would highlight House Bill 1390 is the one that is transformational for impact on us. This is it's been approved by the House and the Senate, and it's with the governor. So we're really excited by it. It's got bipartisan support. And in essence, this bill modifies the Clean Building Performance Standard to enable a compliance pathway for district energy systems like ours that develop a decarbonization plan and implement it. It basically enables us to do what we're wanting to do without doing what I spoke to earlier of having to put 30 air source heat pumps in 30 separate buildings that are going to be non-compliant because of their present energy use. And instead, we can work towards our grander strategy that's to the benefit of all of the buildings on the campus.
Thanks. Let's see, are there ways that students thinking MBAs could get involved in helping advance these efforts, specifically around IRA and Infrastructure Job Act funding research?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. At UBC, the MBAs actually got involved in the net present value calculations that we had done. Ironically, I had just graduated with my own MBA from UBC about 5 years earlier or 4 years earlier. That being said, we engaged the faculty and MBA students there, and came up with a very creative look. When you're looking at doing these NPVs for longer payback projects and looking over a 30-year period, it gets there's some element of creativity, right, around what's the forecasted price of natural gas 30 years from now, right? Like, hey, if we're all really good at forecasting the price of natural gas, we'd probably be in another business, as a commodity broker. So how do we do that in a way that we're being fair to the calculation, but recognizing that it is that longer outlook that enables projects like steam to hot water to have a positive NPV. So anyway, I think that's a fun place for MBAs to jump into this project. Potentially we're learning new things every week, it seems, on the Inflation Reduction Act. And so having more eyes than just the handful that we've got on it, I can only see as being helpful. There were challenges, it still are some challenges with the IRA because the University of Washington is, we're considered an instrumentality of the state from a tax perspective. And there was concern that the IRA, which is set up as a series of tax incentives, wouldn't apply to us. But there's direct pay provisions within, now I'm getting way into the weeds. Anyway, yeah, could we get some help from students as we navigate this potential major funding source? Absolutely.
I just made a note to remind myself to talk to you later about how we can get those questions out there that we would, like help answering. Okay, let's see, next one. Oh, well, Damon has made the point that more information about the energy transformation strategy is available on our website, so you can look at the link for that in the chat box. Okay, which delivery methods are UW considering for implementation of these goals, i.e. design, building, alternative delivery, public-private partnerships, et cetera?
Yeah, ultimately, there's a project that's underway right now it's called the Power Plant Resiliency Project, which is almost like a foundational project that's taking place that is going to enable the conversion from steam to hot water, for example. And without getting into the details of the project, what I just highlight is that project was a integrated design build, and it, to date, knock on wood, has been massively successful in its execution. It's hard not to think that project delivery method is exactly what we need to be able to do with all of the components of this work. Now, the challenge is, carving out our elements of the project into these segmented pieces, and even how I've, you say, well, Dave, you just laid out the 5-part strategy. It's very easy. You got it set up that way. I'd highlight it gets kind of messy kind of quickly when you think of the different projects that all would take place within the envelope of the power plant. And so how you execute the project may not be the same way in which I've described it here today, because we probably want one entity responsible for sort of that optimization of the layout and where things go inside the power plant, for example. And there needs to be connectivity and interaction between the different components of the project. So whether it's the producing hot water from the plant, the new distribution pipes that would carry the hot water, or the new energy transfer stations that would exist within buildings that will replace the existing steam to hot water energy transfer stations. Okay. All of those components might be delivered by different entities, but they have to have they have to be compatible clearly with one another. And so ensuring that that those sort of, call them owner project requirements, are in place and are consistent across the whole project. But I think the delivery method that's got me the most excited is this integrated design build, and applying that to the different packages that come out of the implementation plan, ICSBN. And also, just one other thing, the lake and the sewer in particular opportunities, I think they lend themselves directly to a third party. So, and what I mean by that is, and let's talk about the sewer. So in the same way that today we buy electricity from Seattle City Light, why could we not just buy hot water from a third party entity that's taking that heat from the sewer? And literally we would just be, in essence, the anchor tenant on the mall, the entity that makes it financially viable to do. But we would go into an operating lease that said, hey, we're willing to buy hot water for the next 30 years at this profile, January to December. Right. And so that there are unique opportunities with respect to the sewer connection and the lake. Now the lake, we can't fully separate ourselves because I think we have a fundamental role to play in the permitting process. And as I mentioned earlier, about ensuring that we are making a betterment environmentally to what we were doing. And I think we can bring a lot of knowledge and information to bear. At Cornell University, they created a technical advisory committee that was made up of the experts on their campus that already were the experts on the lake. And I'm sure that I know that we have those same experts here on our campus. And that is a value add that we would bring to that. But in terms of the capital to invest in the pipes to put in the lake, that could be done by a third party. And we would just buy cold water, on a operating lease of a profile of January to December, and the same way as the sewer, where we in essence make it financially viable as the anchor tenant of the mall, but it can be executed by somebody else.
So Dave, we have 4 minutes left. Do you want to wrap it up? And maybe my one other question was a vision of, this is done, what does it look like? Do you want to talk a little bit about what it'll be like when this is done?
Yeah, okay, well, maybe just a little bit along the way, right? Because this is going to be a hard project. There's going to be, I don't know what I got. 12 slides I showed today, and a Telva story. There's, that conversion to steam to hot water. As much as we want to take advantage of the tunnels, there's lots of spots where the tunnels are full. And we're going to have to direct bury the pipe in the ground. And that means, fences going up in areas where you normally wouldn't see fences. The potential positive of that is there an opportunity to fix some accessibility issues that exist on campus at different locations, potentially, right? And we absolutely would want to do that at the same time. But the point is, it's going to be disruptive. Has the potential to be disruptive with respect to that. Hey, I see us being laser focused on that, the management of our electricity, and also ensuring that we've got the reliability of this extra demand on electricity that one would expect for a research powerhouse that we are. And all the folks that we don't really have power outages today, knock on wood, but we get voltage sags, which for some older equipment effectively is like a power outage because it trips it off and doesn't come back on. So I think our ability to be comprehensive and not just reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, but being cognizant of ensuring that that what we do puts us in a position to be resilient. And ensure that we have the services that we would expect related to a major research university that we are.
Cool. And perfect. It's 11:59. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you.